So I've always felt that the scopes are probably one of the most useful tools we have for color grading. And I still feel the same way, except that in certain situations, we might have to decide whether to go with our eyes or to go with the scopes. Now, let me explain myself. I am sure many people have already seen these color illusions where, let's say for example this one, the tile A and tile B are actually the same shade of grey, but to our eyes this would seem kind of lighter and this would seem darker. But if I put a quick power mask or power window over these two blocks and just isolate them, now you can probably see that they're basically the same shade of grey, but if we remove that, our eyes just basically trick us that they're different. The same here, these two are exactly the same shade of red. If I just use a qualifier tool and isolate them, so you can see they're the same shade of red, but when you're surrounded by different colors, our eyes tend to see that color differently. So this one is surrounded by like a shade of blue or slightly dark blue, and this one is surrounded by a shade of yellow line, so the shade of red would appear different. And again, for these Rubik's Cube, if I just use a qualifier tool and isolate these three tiles, you can see that they're basically the same shade of, you could call it brown or you could call it orange, I guess. But if we put them next to its surrounding, this will seem more like a brown and this will seem more like an orange. Now, when does this present a problem? Well, normally when we do color grading, we tend to like to play and keep a consistent color palette. You know, you might go for a music video where you have a certain shade of blue mixed with a certain shade of red, and you want to keep these two shades consistent throughout the scene or the music video. Or if you're making a commercial for a brand, for example, you might want to keep a certain color palette for the brand identity. They might use maybe like an orange like this, so you want to keep the shade of orange consistent throughout the whole commercial. Now, there have been many times when I've matched a certain shade of color with using the vector scope to be pretty much exactly the same, but when I look at it, it just doesn't appear the same. So I'm like frustrated, like I match it perfectly, why doesn't it look the same? And oftentimes the cause is because of this effect. I believe it's called the Benzold effect, where, you know, if you surround a color with a certain different environment of a different shade of colors or different luminance level, different brightnesses basically, that color will look different depending on its environment. So for example, if like you have a singer in a music video, let's say here's a singer, and you maybe one scene he's dancing in a yellow room, so this will be the right one. Maybe I'll put a power window over him so you can see more clearly. So let's say the first room he's dancing in is like a bright yellow room here, and I'll just like, you know, tinker around with the color until I get like a shade of red I like. And then in the next scene I basically match that shade of red again using the vector scope. So as you can see here, the color red is basically exactly the same in both scenes, but to the eye it doesn't look the same. So when I'm grading, when it cuts from one scene to the next, it's it changes. So I'm like, well, should I just keep with the vector scope because I know these are the two exact same color, or should I try to correct it further with my eye? So often I'll try to maybe further tune it with my eyes using, like, you know, just the tools available in DaVinci Resolve or Premiere Pro or whatever, until they both kind of look the same. But then I'm still like, because obviously once they look the same, the color will be different on the vector scope, because I might have to, you know, obviously this is next to blue, so it looks a bit more magenta shade of red. This one is next to yellow, so it looks a bit more towards the orange. So let's say if I put more orange into this one, it might look more similar, but then I'm like, on the vector scope it looks completely different. So I'm like, should I go with my eyes or should I go with my vector scope? Again, here let's have another example. So for this one, let's say I'm creating a commercial for a brand that's using this color orange or brown, whichever you prefer, and I basically match these three tiles with the vector scope or RGB Parade or whichever other tools you have, and then I'm looking at it with my eyes. I'm like, this looks orange, but this looks brown. So should I just say, okay, never mind, I matched it with the vector scope, just leave it at that? Or should I try to correct it? So obviously in this one it looks more orange because its surrounding is darker. so this will appear brighter, so our eyes will tell us it's actually kind of like orange. But in this tile, it's surrounded by brighter areas, so this will look darker, therefore it will look more brownish towards our eyes. So in order to correct that, let's say I want this to be more orangey like this one, I would maybe use a qualifier, which I have already used. Then I'll just use a power window to isolate the top tile, so this one. And now I'll just change the color of this top tile. So I'll have to, in order to make it orange, I'll need to make it brighter and maybe more saturated in relations to its brighter surrounding to make it more orange like this one. So I'll just maybe go to the primary wheels and just make it a bit brighter, and then add it more saturation. So as you can see now, to our eyes, this tile looks more like this one, it's more like orangey. But actually, if we look, if we measure the color with a vector scope, they're now different, because previously they're all the same color. Now I've added brightness, and I've also added more orange to it, so it's more saturated as well. And basically it's a different color scientifically, but to our eyes it looks the same. So here comes the decision that we must always be considerate about. I mean, in certain situations, should we go with our eyes, or should we use the scopes to make it scientifically the same? Now, as I said before, there's no right or wrong answer. One could argue, just keep it with the scope, just make it the same color, and that's just the way our eyes see color, so they might appear different. Or you could say no, because since we are grading this to be watched by humans, and so we might want to grade it in taking into account the way the human eyes see color and compensate accordingly. So I guess the decision is yours. Okay, well, that's pretty much all I wanted to rant about for today. Just to give another factor that we might consider when doing color grading, not just to consider the color of the object that we're grading itself, but also its surrounding environment. And also maybe it can help alleviate some frustration to those who was in the same situation as me, when you're matching a certain color perfectly on the vector scope or on the RGB parade, but for some reason to our eyes, or when you're grading, you just say, that just doesn't look right from scene to scene. Why the color or the shade seem to be changing even though they're exactly the same. So this could be the reason, and maybe now you have another area to consider and to decide how to fix and correct it going forward. Okay, that's pretty much it, and I guess that's it for today. Bye.